I'm not starting again though, right?
You can.
You want me to start again?
Yes. You haven't got very far.
Yeah, no, that's true. It's not very long in general, actually.
Sorry about that, folks. We're now recording.
Okay, so we'll start again. So I'm here today to talk about engineer of record and my experiences. So the EoR concept is relatively new in Australia, with some companies having started to implement the role across their Australian sites about 3 years ago. With the completion of the GISTM, the introduction of this role has been more widely gaining momentum. So I'd like to share my experiences as myself as an EoR across some different mining companies and outline the 4 key areas, which are pretty consistent across all, that I see as important for success of the role. So these are essentially the mining company transparency and structure, the procurement rules, the site representation, and the resourcing and training of both the consultants and the mining representatives. So let's just take a look at the GISTM, which most of you are going to be quite familiar with, and what the definition of the EoR is in that document. So essentially, it's a qualified engineering firm responsible for confirming that the tailings facility is designed, constructed, and decommissioned with appropriate concern for integrity of the facility, and that it aligns with and meets applicable regulations, statutes, guidelines, codes, and standards. The engineer of record may delegate responsibility, but not accountability. In some highly regulated jurisdictions, Japan, blah, 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 blah. So this then is further outlined in terms of roles and responsibilities and what the expectations are under Principle 9. And they are pretty clear requirements for high, very high, and extreme consequence facilities. So many companies are applying these same principles across all their tailings facilities and water storage facilities, regardless of the consequence category. So it is clear that the intent of the GISTM is for the EoR to be a company with a representative nominated. So anybody who has been an EoR representative understands that the success or failure of this EoR role relies on the nominated representative and the relationship that that representative builds with the mining company. Not just with the governance teams, but the site operators, the site engineers, if there is one, the project teams, and the procurement team. As an EoR representative, you don't just want to be across one aspect. So predominantly people tend to focus on the safety of the facility, but it's really important to understand the water management associated with it, the environmental issues, the closure, and obviously the operational, which comes into safety as well. When you first take on the role of engineer of record for a mining company, and in particular a site you have no history with, there is a huge learning curve. Not only do you need to get your head around years of documentation, some complete and some non-existent, you also have to figure out who's who in the zoo. So both come with quite a challenge and can be exciting at first. It's like a shiny new toy, but that soon gets a bit old. So then the reality starts to set in. The time to really familiarise yourself with a site can take months, sometimes years, with new surprises often popping up as you go. It is unrealistic to think that a full understanding occurs quickly. Obviously, monitoring, review, and understanding can be achieved quickly because it's factual data, you're reviewing it, you can put it in the context that it's meant to be, but a full knowledge and understanding of the history of the site, it can only be gained over time. So for the EoR representative role to be done properly, it is a massive task and you need to be on the pulse at all times. To try and achieve this for several sites at once is monumental and very an interesting task to achieve. The EoR company often does not have the work to commit resources consistently and essentially full-time to an EoR commission. So at times, the assistance to the EoR from that company can be stretched thin. So that sort of leads me into the mining company structure and transparency. For greater success, the role of the EoR representative is to create a connection and take a holistic view of the facility and connect the dots, as it were. To ensure that potential risks are identified and mitigated, this can be hampered or slowed by the structure of the mining company, i.e. there may be 3 or 4 teams managing projects or works located globally and on the site. Often these areas do not communicate effectively, and depending on the manager, the scope of works are not communicated to the EoR. And often the EoR is kept at arm's length, not necessarily intentionally, and don't really have an understanding of what kind of works are being put around the company and where they're located. So from a silos perspective, which is very common in a lot of mining companies, it's a big no to success of the engineer of record. So then we move on to procurement. So So one of the biggest pitfalls in implementing the EoR role from a client's perspective is the inability for the mining companies to be agile enough to modify their procurement procedures to truly gain benefit from the EoR. What I mean by this is the work that is hampered by proposal, budgets, POs, historical procurement methods where you have a scope of work and you answer that scope of work. So to really find use in the EoR, a fees and expenses trust relationship would actually benefit in this. And some companies have actually implemented that rather than their existing PO budget arrangement. So something else, which is not really procurement, but is related to procurement, is does the EoR company need to be the designer and be procured for the services across everything that needs to happen on the site? My experience is that they don't need to be one and the same. However, that the EoR needs to be part of the project journey, especially given the responsibility post-design. This applies not only to engineering design, but hydrogeology, seepage management, potential environmental impacts, closure, and proposed facility use. In addition, water management, clean and dirty, both for the external and also what feeds in and out of the TSF. The EoR representative can often be left in the dark whether the design is completed internally or externally. It's not always roses when you're using the same company for both either. So I put a cross on the procurement because it can be a real engagement. So site representation. So many sites do not have an experienced site representation. This often means that the EoR is providing the operational direction on the ground, and often the mining company is not engaged in understanding how the facility performs with operational changes. Site representation is valuable as it brings together projects and operations surrounding the TSF and associated features. Most importantly, it is really great to have a site representative who has a background in dam engineering or associated fields. So above all, communication and building one team is critical to success. So we've got Bob the Builder with his tool out there. He's a great site representative.
I'm about to head off.
So that leads me on to resourcing. So to manage a TSF and or water storage takes 10 people, of which the EoR is only one part of the
leave, don't forget to turn the
To create effectiveness, collaboration and creating connections across the organisation is integral. Not only does it improve governance, but both sides learn things that would otherwise remain unrealised. When all these elements are present, then the EoR role can be rewarding, engaging, or at least a little bit more palatable pill to swallow. On that note, I'd like to welcome our guest speaker, Christopher Hatton. Dave gave him a bit of a brief introduction before, but Chris is a senior program leader with Golder Associates, which is now a member of WSP, and he has a wealth of experience as an EoR, PM, technical lead for evaluating, designing and constructing new and active TSFs. And his talk will outline EoR concepts and history, what an EoR is and isn't, observation methods, reality with resources, and many more valuable topics. So welcome, Chris, and thank you.
Thank you very much.
Just have to make a couple of adjustments here. So we stop sharing, which will allow you, Chris, to share, and then I'll turn up the volume.
All right. Can you see my presentation?
Not yet. We can see the brick wall. It's actually wallpaper.
Hold on. I got it here. Let's see.
The share screen is the green button in the bottom middle.
Yep. No, I got it. Got it right here. So, got it now?
Yep. Yeah, just maximize it.
Yep. On it. Perfect.
All yours.
And then you want to mute everybody else?
Yes, let's see if I can do that.
All right. While Dave's doing that, thank you very much for allowing me the opportunity to talk. It's 1 a.m. here in beautiful Arizona and 110 degrees. Always tip your bartenders. Make sure they're well compensated for the hard work that they do. Hey, my name's Chris Hatton. I'm a senior program leader, geotechnical engineer with Golder out of the Denver office here in the U.S. I graduated from Colorado State University, undergraduate and master's in civil engineering, and I've got about 40 years in the business. The majority of my life's experience in the industry has been working with tailing dam design, construction, operation, closure, I've been an engineer of record on multiple dams, on and off over the years, and I've trained, actually that number is probably a little bit low. I'm probably closer to about 1,800 operators and engineers worldwide beginning in 1996. I had a chance to start out and participate in the development of Freeport's stewardship program back in 2004, and was an integral part of that until I left URS or AECOM back in 2015. I started my career with a company called Woodward Clyde Consultants, who actually had a very strong Australian presence. We were bought out by URS, AECOM, and then I spent about 5 years with a company called Haley and Aldrich, starting their Denver office. I'm a co-author, and now I'm with Golder. I've actually been here almost a year. I'm an active review board member, and right now what I'm doing within Golder and within my career is really, I do about a third review. I do a third of EoR work. I actually still continue as an EoR. I think that's important, especially as a reviewer. I think there's a certain grounding in reality. Being an EoR is hard. It's really difficult, especially on some of these world-class facilities. It's a lot of work. It's hard. And so I think doing that and gives perspective to reviewers. And then I'm part of a group that's developing Golder's in-house EoR capabilities, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Reference documents for this discussion. I'm going to go back to the CDA bulletins. The Geoprofessional Business Association put together a guidance document in 2018 on the engineer of record. MAC, and then we have the tailings governance framework, GISTM, tailing management good practice, and the conformance protocol. And there is a group right now that I'm participating in. It's not listed here, but it's a co-convened group between the Canadian Dam Association and USSD, United States Society on Dams, and we are we are looking at warehousing all of the information on engineer of record. We've got some training that we've pushed out, and we will continue to push out, but it's really, it's taking everything that we know about engineer of record, which on the surface seems pretty simple, but as we get into it, there's a lot of different permutations, and we're trying to not only compile that so it's a resource available to everyone, but we're also putting the models out there and putting trainings together and helping people train their engineer of record, because there's no formal training process. So if you look at the engineer of record, sort of the concept, came out of the US. I would say, I guess that's what we, sort of our thoughts, Canada and US, North America. And if you look at the concept, typical water dam life cycle, you've got this design, construction, commissioning window, excuse me, and it's relatively short, and then you have the operation. You fill the bucket and you operate it, and there isn't a lot of engineering. Typically, there isn't a lot of engineering interaction unless they're expanding the facility or whatever. But with tailing, you're looking at a life cycle that can be, obviously tens of years, but if you look at some of the world-class facilities worldwide, we're designing a new tailing dam in Arizona, and we're looking at an operational life of over 100 years. So you look at the design process, and that's just beginning, and then you go into this, sustaining capital, OPEX and all that, and it carries on, and so you have to have this individual, this group, whatever, that really carry the initial design on through. And it's in the case of, again, large base metal, mines and some of the gold properties, it's a generational transition. And if we look at the engagement of engineers and the EoR timeline, you can actually anchor it if you wanted to earlier in time. You can actually take it all the way back to when the Quebec bridge failed up in Canada. But we really took it back. We looked at it. There was a group of us that looked at this, and we really said, the standard of practice, first formalized the term engineer of record in '76, and In 81, there was in Kansas City, there was a Hyatt Regency skywalk that failed, and it killed 100, just basically dropped from the ceiling and killed 141 people. And there were a lot of things behind the scenes that were happening that really raised serious ethics issues and disengaged engineering leadership and that sort of thing. And so we see coming out of that ASCE Association, or American Society of Civil Engineers, starting to define the engineer of record and the structure. Following that, there's a Station Square collapse that happened in '88, and there were 2 firms that were found guilty in that. And you have kind of overarching in the U.S. There was a group called ASFE, Association of Foundation Engineers. Geotechnical engineering, really came out of structural engineering and sort of became its own practice in the early 60s. And so ASFE came out of that because we were really having a difficult time finding insurance as a group. And so they put together guidance documents and standard of practice and how to really function as a geotechnical engineer. They have since, sorry, this is manually toggling. They have since become the Geoprofessional Business Association, GBA. And I think in that transition, some of the history of ASFE got lost. So just as I speak to GBA, it's basically the same thing. And then we transition into more formal definitions of engineer of record. CDA was putting out a technical bulletin, and they were putting together guidance on dam safety guidelines about the time Mount Poly failed. And if you look at Mount Poly as a failure, there were so many engineering firms involved, different designers, you had different transitioning engineer of record. It was just sort of the dog's breakfast of everything that you could really do wrong. And nobody really had firm ownership, or they didn't want ownership because they didn't like what was going on. And so that was a really big eye opener. That was a step change for all of us. The one that really, I think, caught all of us a bit by surprise was Samarco. And you could, after Mount Poly, there was a lot of activity and, talk and that sort of thing. And then Samarco failed. And I think it caught all of us by surprise because it happened so quickly after Mount Poly. It wasn't too long after. And I think that was we've known about brittle failure. We've talked about brittle failure in tailing dams, but I think that really drove that issue home. And coming out of that, you've got the MAC guidance, and then the GBA. There was a group of us in the U.S. That put together one of our first conferences in 2017 that eventually became the good practice guide for EoR. With the is my little thing showing up here? I'll get rid of that. There was a guidance document that came out by the GBA, which is actually pretty good. It's probably exceeded its time now that the GIS team is out there. And then, coming out of Brazil, there was a lot of regulations, and one of the regulations was videotaping, continuous videotaping, monitoring of your dams. And I think, 2019 Brumadinho really, sort of brought everything home. And we didn't think that a tailing dam could fail like that. I think there was a lot of us that went, whoa. So what I'm going to talk about is sort of the elements of the engineer of record. And if you look at and I'm going to take it back since the global industry standards out there, I'm going to touch on this just briefly, but that's going to be the backdrop from which we're going to be operating behind for quite a long time. So and the permutations of that. So you've got after Mount Poly and in that time frame, you've got ICMM coming out with the 6 key elements that they put in the governance tailing or the 6 elements of tailing and management and governance, and then that leads into the co-conveners coming together after Brumadinho and developing the global industry tailing standard. And there's really 77 requirements that come out of that. And the backdrop of that is social environmental responsibility. And so there's the technical aspects of it, but there's also the social responsibility part of that as well. Then the question comes up, how do we apply this? And so that's where we see the good practice guide come out, and really ICMM coming in and saying, okay, here's how we would envision executing that. And then how do we monitor it? How does ICMM enforce, if you will, it's probably a strong word, but verify that everybody's in compliance with the GISTM, and that's where we see the conformance protocol coming out. Now, if you look at these governing documents, which are summarized here, this is probably one of the more interesting dynamics that's going on right now. And ICMM member firms right now are going to obviously comply with the conformance protocol. So Rio Tinto and BHP and everybody, Freeport, they're on board with it in some way, shape, or form. There are those that are going to choose not to, that are self-funded, whatever the company is or the country. They're not going to follow ICMM. They're going to choose not to. But there's this big gray area. And I think a lot of the mid-tier engineering firms or non-ICMM members were looking at this going, we're going to kind of wait and see what happens. What they didn't expect, I don't think any of us expected, was that the investors and the insurance companies, and this is a big one, the insurance companies are now coming out and saying, hey, how are you demonstrating conformance with the ICMM or the GISTM standard? And that's creating a lot of dynamics within the industry right now. And so there's a lot of companies that are being caught flat-footed, and they were kind of waiting to see things get fleshed out. And now all of a sudden they're going, we've got to comply, or otherwise we're going to be able to get insurance. So that was that's happening real time right now. We're seeing that happening in quite a few venues. If you look at the GISTM and the application, it's actually I like what they're doing, and some of the things that are coming out of it, and some of it I don't particularly care for. But you've got two sort of the third and fourth triumvirates. So you have this one triumvirate is going to be your accountable executive, the engineer of record, and the RTFE, responsible tailing facility engineer. So you've got RTFE on the operator's owner side, and then you've got the engineer of record, and my preference would be on the outside, and they're working jointly with the account executive. That's a strong team. That's a very, very strong team. When you're looking at review, you replace your RTFE with the independent review, the EoR, and the account executive, and that's your QA process. But those two groups are really hooked at the hips for perpetuity in the management of the governance of the tailing facility. And Liz talked about this a little bit, but if you look at the definition, there was a lot of back and forth on whether an EoR is a company or an individual. If you look at, we're all tailing engineers here, we all know the business, we all don't know it all, and if you do, you're misplaced. So we're always learning. It's a journey. We're really strong in some areas, we're not strong in other areas. And so from a very practical standpoint, it really needs to be, it's an individual who's accounted for. The engineer of record is accountable for everything. They can delegate that responsibility, but they don't lose, or they can't give away accountability. But typically it's a firm, it's an individual supported by a firm. And that was one of actually my personal learnings in being with a smaller company. It was a bit of a challenge for me to really do what I wanted to do, because I didn't have the depth of resources. And that's part of the reason actually why I went to Golder. If we look at the GISTM is really a guidance, and there's obviously other guidance documents. The GISTM was actually built against CDA and MAC, and to a lesser extent GBA guidance. And that's because the co-conveners, that's where they were coming from, and there was a lot of really good information in there. So that's a backdrop, but it doesn't replace state, federal guidelines. So looking at your jurisdiction, those always control, and not that you guys would know, Montana law, but in the states, actually the jurisdiction of tailing dams really falls under state requirements. And in the state of Montana, the EoR is a facility designer. Those two are permanently hooked together. And then they also preclude an employee, an owner, from being an EoR. So they want that separation from the operations. So that's the decision that they made. The other thing that comes in is responsible charge. And if you look at the EoR and the responsible charge, there's been a lot of definition around that in North America. And responsible charge actually was really brought to the forefront again in 81, with, at least in North America, with the Hyatt collapse. And it really is in Florida. This is a definition out of Florida, but it's, you know, you've got control over what's happening, and you've got responsibility. And you are required to understand what decisions are being made, and they're being made under your personal direction. And you can delegate it, but at the end of the day, you are responsible, and you have control and authority. So the engineer of record is, hey Chris, by the way, great minds think alike on this figure. You know, the engineer of record is gonna execute the design vision, and this is there's some really important things coming out of this, and I've got, on some of this, I've got really strong feelings. Your engineer of record is a trusted advisor, and they're the stewards of the dam. My preference is to have your engineer of record outside of the operating company. Now there are models that are different than that, and they retain this history, and that's one of the things that AECOM, URS, Golder, you know, we have this with our clients. We have this history, and especially on legacy projects that are going, you know, multi-generational. Having that legacy history is really important, and I can't even begin to tell you as a reviewer how important that history is. It is so incredibly important, and you dip into it because things change as you expand and that sort of thing. And it's, you know, we see it as an individual supported by the firm and a team of dam safety specialists. They're going to oversee proper design. They're going to be vigilant. They're the ones that can stand on the ladder, look to the horizon, and work with a client and say, hey, you know, this isn't the direction you want to go. And the most important thing is that they're continually engaged. And this idea that your engineer of record just comes out once a year and checks your dam, that's not going to fly. That's done. May as well pack that one up. And one of the things that they need to do is they need to be assertive, and they have to have the fortitude to, you know, really speak their mind. And you know, basically what we say is they need to be able to tell the owner that their baby is ugly, you know, and things aren't right. What they're not, I did a survey here a while back on what an engineer is not, and ultimately they don't know everything about the TSF. It's in these legacy projects, it's recognized it's almost impossible to do. They're not the last person you call. They're not kept in the dark. They're not a psychic. They are not a spokesperson for the property in any capacity. They can't travel back in time. You are not going to use them as an insurance policy. The GISTM, you know, it really makes that clear that the responsibility for this facility resides squarely on the back of the owners. They're not going to rubber stamp things. They're not a flash mob. We call it a seagull. You know, they fly in, flap their wings, squawk, poop all over everything, and leave. And you know, that's not who they are anymore. And they're not a quickie. You know, they're not in and out, check the box, and you know, checking their watch and off to catch a plane. Quickie probably wasn't a good choice of words there. Sorry about that, but you get the gist. It's, you know, it's the engineer that comes in and, you know, is looking at their watch and wanting to get out. That's not who they are. So they have a technical background. They need to be knowledgeable. And if you look at the development of an engineer of record, you know, coming out of university, nobody's trained to be a tailings engineer. That the programs do not exist right now. I think UBC is probably pretty close to having a certificate on that of some sort, and there's others that are moving in that direction. But right now, that doesn't exist that I know of. So the process is really on the job training, and you have these different aspects of the training, and your experience is really commiserate with your responsibilities are really commiserate with your experience. I'm a big fan of taking younger engineers and putting them out on inactive sites and have them help out as engineer of record and eventually take over, because the inactive sites have all the responsibility of an active site, but they don't have the dynamics of active deposition. And it's a good way for kids to get out there and try things out. You know, minimum 10 years experience. You can't microwave that. You can't change it. You know, nothing replaces 10 years of experience, but 10 years of experience. The concern that we have and the problem that we're seeing right now is that a lot of the young engineers are really lacking field construction and operational experience. So you're seeing, you know, younger engineers that have, and I'm exaggerating here a bit, but they've been sitting in a closet with somebody shoving work under the door running FLAC models for 10 years. And now all of a sudden it's like, hey, you want to be an engineer of record? That's not really a good way to go. They need to have that design experience and the construction and all that. Folks want to see a bachelor's degree in civil engineering discipline. There are some thoughts that, you know, some of the differing degrees outside of civil would be acceptable, and I think you can argue that either way. I think there's a broadness of just understanding the civil works, because it is a big civil works. Relevant advanced degrees, in my opinion, are mandatory, especially if you're going to be working on the bigger dams and extreme facilities. You just don't get enough education that is the key education in an undergraduate program. And then obviously knowledge of local regulations, and then good standing in a registration in the local jurisdiction. Other non-technical qualifications: engaged frequently. I'm really a big proponent of this, and especially on a large facility. Could you mute your mic, whoever was clearing their throat there? I'm a big proponent of having the engineer of record engaged on, if not daily, weekly, depending on, you know, where you're at in your operational cycle. But some of these bigger operations, and when I say bigger, I'm talking 50 to 100,000 tons per day sort of facilities. There's so much going on that having your engineer of record engaged daily, working with your operations folks, is a cheap spend, and it yields significant benefits. And I'll tell you, if you look at a change that can be made, let's say on a daily basis from interaction, and let's say that costs $1. If you make that change, taking it into construction at a pre-feasibility level, it's going to cost $10. Feasibility, you're looking at $100. By the time you get into design, that change is going to cost you $1,000. If you need to make the change during construction, you're looking at about $10,000 change. And if it's post-construction, you're looking at $100,000. So you can spend a very small amount of money, and with a good engineer of record, they can really guide you through the process and just the day-to-day communications. They have to have good written and oral communication skills. That's absolutely mandatory. They need to be able to have the presence to generate the trust from their peers, colleagues, and that sort of thing. And they need to be able to recognize what their strengths are: geotechnical engineering, process, surface water hydrology, hydraulics. And then they need to have the resources at call that can support their deficiencies. In the States, and I think it's less, in my experience, it's less of an issue in Australia from what I've seen, but there's in the States, North America, there is an unwillingness to travel to the site, especially on short notice. And that's, I mean, it's how we do business. You know, our tailing dams aren't in our backyard, so we've got to be able to do that. And having the courage and the resolve to, you know, speak your mind and administer the design, and tell the client that this isn't working, you know, the baby's ugly. And if you look from a commodity standpoint, and I'll talk about this a little bit more, but high emotional intelligence, as a community, as a world, our emotional intelligence is in the gutter. But in reality, for what we're doing right now, we really have to operate with a high emotional intelligence as a community. They need to project confidence, and they really have to demonstrate the ability to apply critical thinking. So there's this personal development process that is a backdrop for the engineer of record. Now, if we look at the EoR, sorry, If we look at the EoR models, and I'll talk about this just briefly. So your engineer of record, the common models, your engineer of record is either outside the organization, which is a consultant, or they're part of the operating team in-house. And there's mining companies that do both. My preference, personally, is that they're an outside consultant, because they're separated. You know, mining is obviously a very transient business. You know, every 2 years, people are changing positions, getting promoted, and that sort of thing. And as you go through that attrition process and growth, you can't keep somebody internally there doing the same thing over and over again, I don't believe. And so you start to lose the history. If you have somebody from the outside, you can kind of retain that history. Less common models would be the third-party reviewer, which is being proposed by Chile. I'm not exactly sure what that looks like. I'm aware of it, but a little bit. But they're actually promulgating regulations that are going to assign the engineer of record as a third-party reviewer, which makes no sense. That's completely counter to the GISTM. And then in a highly regulated jurisdiction, for example, Japan, the EoR is actually the regulatory authority, that model is quite different too. And I'm not studied on that, but I know that's one of the models, and we'll have more coming out on that, on what those models look like. Now we have the designer of record, and the designer of record, that's your design engineer team. They're responsible for the design. They stamp the drawings. We all know that. They certified the as-built drawings. There's different roles for the DOR and the EOR. If you look at combining those, common DOR models really are you can have your designer can be the current EOR, which is preferred. I prefer that. I think that's the way to go. They can be separate. They can be an outside consultant, different than the EOR. So you have an EOR and a designer, or they can be part of the owner's in-house design capabilities. When you start separating your designer and your engineer of record, you're going to create significant conflict. And not always, but you create, I guess, let me rephrase that. You create the potential for conflict. And no matter how you structure that contractual relationship, you have an EOR that is going to take ownership of somebody else's work. And the management of that process and bringing those people together so that when you get to the end and the commissioning, they agree to transfer the design to the EOR takes an awful lot of work. And there are instances in Australia where that transfer has not been successful. Either, let's say as an example, a senior guy who was the EOR retires before the design's done, the deputy EOR, or before the design is completed, deputy EOR steps in, takes leadership and says, hey, I don't like the way it was designed. I'm not going to take the responsibility. That's a problem. And that's a serious problem. And you also have this transfer of liability and risk. So it's, I am a big proponent, and I will always be, that the EOR and the DOR are the same person. However, resource limited, that may be a sort of an idealized, process. So things to keep in mind: every single dam is unique. Their behavior is transient, always, from the beginning to the end. In the closure, the materials are non-homogeneous, anisotropic. I'm speaking to the choir here a little bit. Construction is continuous till it's not. The operators, in all cases, are the contractor. They are your contractor that are building the dam, and it's important that you engage them. And there's a lot to be written and talked about on that. Each day is different, and your operators can profoundly affect the behavior of a dam. You can have a really good design, and operators can screw it up really quickly. Conversely, you can have really well-trained operators and a poor design. You're going to end up in the same place. So it's important that you engage your operators. And opportunities for tailing management are regularly lost. And then again, another backdrop for all of this is the observational method. And if you look at GISTM and the Good Practice Guide, there was significant thought of bringing in the observational method. Now, where the observational method actually PEC identified in the observational method that falls down as under brittle behavior, significant stress change under small amounts of strain. And we deal with the brittle material. However, you can modify the observational method so that you're actually monitoring for conditions that would generate brittle behavior. So I think we've dealt with that. But the observational method is really proactive. And if we look at tailing management, it is inherently reactive. It's not a good place to be. And if you have a really well-run operation, your EoR can lead you through the process and get it into a proactive process. It's not going to be purely proactive. It's inherently going to be inherently reactive, but there's significant things you can do to transition. The benefit of being a proactive operation is you can control your capital costs, both short-term and long-term, much better if you're planning ahead. Observational method works really well with incremental construction and quite well with long-term projects. There's a huge history of benefit when it's properly applied, and it fits in nicely with the OMS process and existing TARPs. What PEC identified and long ago in '69 is that it has experienced a definitional application drift, and it's transitioned from planned change management to make shit up as you go. This is the observational method is really eliminating the uncertainty. It's planning for, unusual conditions and really having those thought out before they occur. What we see now is people say, oh yeah, we use the observational method, this didn't work, so we're going to try something else. That's not the observational method. That's, again, make shit up as you go. So the paradox is that the observational method is intended to leave nothing to uncertainty. That's the ideal. So if we look at and transitioning in, so I'm going to go into the intrinsic elements of the EoR. If we look at and we'll use the conformance protocol as a backdrop. So if you look at the conformance protocol, there's 77 requirements, and in that document you have the principal requirement, you have the conformance assessment, you have what is the evidential materials that you're going to have to generate so it meets that you can demonstrate that it meets the criteria, and then the interpretive clarification notes, meaning some of the stuff is really difficult to understand or not well defined, and they recognize it, so they provided some clarification. Then you have the standards. So if you look at principle 9 within the GISTM, they talk about appointing and empowering an engineer of record. And that's significant. One of the things that I saw and this is my perspective coming from North America, but one of the things that I saw in Australia quite a bit was that the designers were shoved in a corner. You have a large mining operation that is generating significant revenue. They're going to design a dam. This is a hypothetical. They're going to design a small dam, and they needed to drill 6 test holes. And millions of dollars going out on rail cars out of facilities or truck or whatever. And this engineer comes in and says, okay, I need to drill 6 holes. They're this deep, and we're going to do this. And we're going to test for this. We're going to do this testing in situ, and we're going to pull samples. And the reply that came back from procurement was, oh, that's really expensive. Can you eliminate 2 holes? Are you freaking kidding me? And so that sort of way of doing business has got to go. We need to give the engineer of record the tools that they need to do their job properly. And we, as an industry, we need to recognize that there's a crap ton of uncertainty in what we do, and we may get in there and find things that we don't really expect. So, rather than leaving the engineering to the last minute, we need to put the engineering out front, plan it, and have some buffer in there that if things change and we need to, change paths, observational method, that we have the ability to make those changes. The other thing that comes out, and this is principle 11, develop an organizational culture that promotes learning, communication, and early problem recognition. And I should have highlighted it here. The highlight came out, but under 11.1, educate personnel. Now, personnel is an interesting word, who have a role in any phase of the tailing facility life cycle about how their job procedures and responsibilities relate to prevention of failure. Personnel, this is everybody. This is the whole enchilada. So when they did, this is a GISTM definition of personnel. They're employees, contractors, consultants, included with direct and indirect responsibilities. This includes your legal, this includes procurement. They're talking about training the entire group that touches that dam in some way, shape, or form about how to properly construct that dam. Fundamentally, if you're in that supply chain, if you touch it, you own it. And I'll tell you, I've been training operators since the mid 1990s, and we've taken, obviously very complex concepts, distilled it down to the operator level. Nothing against operators, it's just they have a different experience, but we bring it down to something that's really practical. Dave Brett does a beautiful job of doing this. And in this process, one of the things that I tried here years and years ago was to train procurement people and attorneys. And I'll tell you what, when you start going through dam breaks and showing them what happens when a tailing dam fails and they start understanding the process, even at a rudimentary level, it's amazing how, they'll and I heard stories about this where their engineers would come in and say, hey, we need this. Is it for dam safety? Oh yeah. Oh, here you go. Sign them, sign the paper, and boom, it's off and go. And so they become part of the process in successful tailing dam management. And that's part of safe dam, management. Now, the problem with the GISTM is we have developed all of these requirements. We basically created a bus to take us to where we need to go, and we don't have anybody to fill that bus. And that's a problem, and it's a problem worldwide. You guys are feeling it now. It's not going to get any better for 10, 12 years. I mean, this is how we're going to be living for a long time. And so we need to recognize, and there's been a lot that I've written and others have written about this, but what's a labor demand look like? And so it's with CSU, Colorado State University, and Marsh and Golder, we went in and we took a look, and we're still doing research on it, trying to figure out how many tailing dams there are in the world. And sort of one of the first step is how many dams can an senior engineer handle, from an engineer of record type standpoint. And the answer is one, maybe two. If they're world class, one. If they're larger dams, maybe two. Maybe a combination of 2 or 3 smaller dams. How many DSRs, dam safety reviews, can they handle in a year? 3 to 5? 5's a lot. A lot of people don't think you could do 5, so you're stuck with 3, and that's all you do is DSRs. What we're seeing guys collect and ladies collect EoR responsibilities like the damn Pokemon cards, and it's not about the number, it's about the quality. And so we really need to recognize that, we don't have the fortitude to really address these as is being required if we start collecting, 7, 8, 9 dams that we're going to be engineer of record on. It's a problem. It's a serious problem. And so at CSU, we went back and with Golder and Marsh, the insurance company, we went back and we looked at, how many qualified tailing professionals do we need? And then we've got another paper coming out at Tailing and Mine Waste here in the fall. But if you look at the estimates of tailing dams worldwide and the inventory, this is sort of an inventory of what we've got up to this point. But Jerry had estimated in a paper 18,000. Davies was at 3,500. What we've identified right now, it's actually larger than 16,000. We're probably closer to 18,000. I would guess, if I were going to speculate, it's probably closer to 25 to 30,000 tailing dams worldwide. That's what we're dealing with. For the purposes of our exercise, we settled in at 16,000 because that's what we had definitive resources. And then we went through and we said, okay, of these dams, a certain portion are high hazard or require more effort from an engineer of record. Some are inactive, they require less effort, and then some are sort of in between. And we looked at, a 40-hour work week, 52 weeks per year. We came up with 10,000 people, engineers, are required to support this at many different levels to manage these 16,000 dams. That's a significant resource, and we don't have that level of resources within. And this is just EoR responsibilities. This has nothing to do with new dams, sustaining capital, none of that. This is just complying with the GISTM as it sits with respect to EoR responsibilities. So we have a significant deficiency. So the impacts from this is, as consultants and looking down the road, and you're probably already seeing that, we're no longer competing for work. We're turning down work. I know a lot of people that are turning down work. We don't need it. We're competing for people. And we're seeing industry grabbing qualified resources out of our firms. If you look at the best resources for supporting a mining operation, it's coming out of consulting because they have both breadth and depth of experience. They have multiple projects and they have sustained experience 2-3 years on a single project, and that's your breadth and your depth. And there's an expectation that we, as consultants, we can just start churning these people out. There's a machine that's slapping a calculator in their hand and training them up and send them out the door, and that's not the reality. And we're seeing a lot of pressure from outside influences. We're seeing significant attrition in our senior people. We have reviewers that are 80 plus years old. I mean, there's a shelf life. Sorry guys, but I mean we all have the same thing, and we're reaching shelf life on a lot of our senior folks, or they've left the industry already. There in the past, there's been lack of industry peer and support, and I've got really strong feelings about this. BC has done a really big disservice to the industry, and you have, and I'll say this to their face, but you've got some self-indulgent regulatory bodies that are admonishing people in a public forum that just is unacceptable. You look at the folks that are being prosecuted, in the Mount Poly situation. Fine, if you feel like they need to be prosecuted, that's fine. You don't need to send out an 80, 90-page paper that lists out everything that they did wrong. Do it in private, let them learn from it, and let's move on. But the ramifications from that are far-reaching. I did a talk up at Tailing and Mine Waste in Vancouver in 2019, and I spoke at Technical College in British Columbia afterwards, and I talked with a professor out of the university, or Queen's University in Canada, and she said she lost 6 students after they started, they publicly started pushing this out in the public. They said they didn't want anything to do with being an engineer of record. And I talked to a group of 25 students, and about half of them didn't want to be an engineer of record because they were afraid. And after we talked it through and we understand really what was going on, they were like, oh, okay, well, this makes sense. But it's this fear, and it's things like this that are really incredibly destructive to the industry, and we have got to stop doing that. And those guys need feedback, and we need to speak up when people do stuff like this, because it's just flat out wrong. To the procurement folks, I would say that the way we solicited resources, and Liz touched on this a little bit, needs to change now. We've always talked about quality over cost. The reality is we're so constrained for resources. If, as an example, if you got 5 companies competitively competing on a geotechnical scope, and let's say that scope's 200 hours, one company wins, so that 200-hour investment has paid a dividend, but 4 companies have committed 200 hours of senior, mid-level, junior people. So you've got 800 hours that was extracted out of your resource pool a year, or a half a year. So you've taken a half a year of a person's time out of your resource pool and it's gone to no practical use other than placating somebody in procurement. And that we can't, it's not sustainable. We can't do business like that anymore. So you're going to see, as an industry person, you're going to see, as an operating person, you're going to have people saying, no, I can't do it. Sorry. And there's going to be a lot of that going on. So again, that model's got to change. The other thing, now this is speculation on my part, so do with it what you want, but we're seeing a large migration of consulting people into industry. And there's certain limitations on working within industry, from design, project, and technical exposure. There's things that you can do with a larger company that can kind of placate that. But on the mid-tier, you know, you design one dam, you work on one dam, and then, you know, 3 years later, you're like, okay, well, what's next? Well, you're still working on the dam. So there's a level of boredom and monotony that's going to come out of that. And so I think what we're going to see is you've got this transition in, you're going to see a rebound in approximately 3 to 5 years, probably peaks out about 7 years, where people are going to come back out of industry and they're going to come back into consulting because they want more, they need more, and then it'll reach some sort of equilibrium. So long term, there's going to be an industry experience expectation with the EoRs, and I think there's an opportunity as an industry to actually swap people back and forth and actually manage this process a little bit better. So you're providing opportunities for new engineers on the process side, on the operations side, so they understand what it is to be an operator, and vice versa. You can take an operator, bring them into consulting, and teach them how to do design work, discipline design. So there's opportunities back and forth there, and I don't think we figured out how to do that, how to cost it, how to, you know, contract it, but the opportunities there, and I know there's some firms that are trying to do that. Independent reviews. Everybody wants, you know, the independent reviewer that's pure and clean and has never seen the site, and, you know, flies down on a cloud, and it's not happening. With the lack of resources, the sharing of resources, and that sort of thing, everybody's dirty. Everybody's got some sort of inherent conflict, and so managing that conflict of interest is going to be really important, whether it's compartmentalizing some of the consultancies by continent or by discipline or whatever, but it's going to be difficult, and especially with the significant attrition we're seeing in our senior leadership. Educational initiatives right now, last 2 years, there's been a big push to develop training programs for engineers. I had a chance to sit in on Dave Williams' program. I went through that, and other than having questions like what is the best answer, because my best answer was far different than his best answer, it was an excellent program, really, really well done. I would highly recommend it. He's taken things in a direction. David Brett is focusing on vocational training, and you have Andy with Future Tales. You've got Dirk with UBC and the Global Mine Waste Management, their graduate certificate. University of Alberta's got an excellent training program. Morgenstern and Ward Wilson do that every couple years. I think actually this year is the year where they're going to do that. That's an excellent program, really good. Colorado School of Mines, in conjunction with Colorado State University and University of Arizona, it's got the Tailings Center of Excellence. They're hooked very closely to Colorado State and Chris Barather. Chris has joined forces with Georgia Tech, University of Illinois, and University of California, Berkeley, and they've got tailing. And I actually teach in both those venues, but they're working very closely together. And then Clone Crippen is putting together an EoR internal training program for Glencore. I had a chance to do an expert moment on there and see some of their modules. They're world class. The modules are outstanding. They are the best. They are the best modules that I've ever seen in any training venue. They are exceptional. They will be the gold standard for modules, and they're really set up for different levels of experience within, you know, management and operators and that sort of thing. They're fabulous. So so we have all of these different educational initiatives, and everybody's sort of finding their place. But I think that's really important, and it's going to be important that we support those initiatives. And we're seeing very good collaboration between these groups, and that's got to continue. So the thing that's missing out a lot of this is the development of soft skills. And that's one of the things that's missing, and that's where we get into the esoteric. If you look at a tailing engineer, you need three, there's three legs to success, if you will: your technical skills, your operations understanding, and your people skills. And what we see is, and I like this proverb, but you have a man is touring construction of a cathedral, and he's interviewing workers. And he walks in and he talks with a stonemason and asks him what he's doing, and he says, the stonemason says, "Well, I'm chipping away at stones, for the cathedral, or chipping away at stones." And he goes to the next person. It turns out to be another stonemason. He asks him what he's doing. He says, "Well, I'm carving gargoyles." And so throughout the day, he asks different people, what they're doing, and they're all really focused on their task at hand. And at the end of the day, he's walking out and he sees an old lady sweeping, and he asks her what she's doing, and she looks at him with a big smile and great pride, and she says, "I'm glad you asked. I'm building a cathedral." And we really lose focus as a community, as companies, as EoRs, that we're so focused on our task, and we're really losing sight of the big picture, and we need to regain that sight. As communicators, we pride ourselves on communication, and we're very good communicators. What we're not very good at doing is making connections. And there's a significant difference between communication and connection. And that's the difference between success and failure. You can communicate something, but if you're not connecting with the individual or the company, you've failed. And so that's where emotional IQ comes in. And this is, if you look at a commodity that's going to be marketable, if you're new to engineering, this is going to be the most important commodity within your toolbox and the development of this commodity for the next 10 years. And emotional skills are, being self-aware and monitoring your behavior, reflecting on your feelings, pausing before you react, providing and receiving constructive criticism and praise, being empathetic to somebody's situation without expecting anything in return. One of the big things we need to teach our younger people to do, they're significantly afraid of failure. It is built into their DNA, and the reality is that we all fail every day. And so we've got to teach our young engineers how to pick themselves up after a failure, and then go through and actually pluck out the opportunities out of there. And that's a significant process. And as much as somebody comes into the office and you hire them brand new, and it's like, okay, here's your office, here's your key to the restroom, here's this and that. And by the way, you're going to fail, and this is how you're going to pick yourself up, because it's a hell of a lot easier to figure out how you're going to pick yourself up before you fail than when you're in the middle of it going, "Oh my God, how do I get out of this?" And we've got to demonstrate and own our own errors, and we've got to show others grace. People make mistakes. We got to show them grace. And then we have to be authentic and courageous. We really, in the end, we have to put ourselves out there and allow ourselves to be vulnerable. If you guys follow Brene Brown, and I'm a big believer in Theodore Roosevelt. I won't read through this, but he in Sorbonne, France, in 1910, he was speaking in his speech, "Citizen in a Republic," and he talks about being the man in the arena, and not being the critic and sitting on the outside and criticizing, but actually be in the arena. Win or lose, you're growing and you're learning, and it's putting yourself out there and really getting dirty and dusty and beat up and that sort of thing. That's how you grow, and that's how you become better. You look at taking risks and vulnerability. Great sailors don't come from smooth seas. Smooth seas don't make a great sailor. They never will. So if we look at emotional engagement, so a new engineer coming in, this could be a new operator. I wrote about this as operators, but Chris Berether actually extrapolated it out into engineers. There's 5 levels of engagement. So you have oblivious. This is probably one of the more dangerous levels, because people really don't they're executing a duty. They're a robot, they're a checkbox. They're really unaware, or maybe not even concerned about the impacts of what they're doing. They're going to be unfamiliar with what's going on. They're going to lack, really, maybe even as an operator, lack the desire to pursue a tailing career, or as an engineer, they're just looking at it going, "Oh God, I don't want to do this." you know, and it's the highest risk to the operation. It is a purely reactive stance. As you grow and you start becoming aware and you hit that sort of 3 to 4 year experience, your eyes open and you start figuring out what's going on, and you kind of grasp, you know, here's the tools, here's how I use them. You're not empowered to take action yet, and you're not always following the OMS, or in the case of an operator, but you're starting to become aware. You're realizing that what you do actually has an impact, and you're developing sort of these initial concepts of understanding of how tailing dams work and are constructed. And if you look at some of the guidance, it's 10,000 hours of experience. It's 5 years of experience is really where you kind of get into this awareness. Once you get beyond that 10,000 hours, now you're engaged. And now you're transitioning from being reactive to proactive. You're empowered to take action. You're recognizing that you can have impacts. There's a significant liability. You can, if you do A, you're going to get B. And so you're starting to become engaged into the process, and you're starting to grow within the program. So you're going to be at, you know, maybe 15,000 hours of experience. When you get to level 4, so you hit that 20,000, 25,000 hours of experience, now you're starting to collaborate. You start to understand the process, the environmental, hydrogeology, that sort of thing, and you're starting to see how all of these things fit together. You're now in a proactive approach. You're able to affect change. You're able to support the facility. You're getting into that trusted advisor position, and you're willing to really exchange resources and ideas, and you have the confidence to understand that you have strengths and weaknesses and what your limitations are. And then the idealized position is entrepreneurial. And that's when you get into the 20, 30,000 hours. And this is where you understand things so well that you can go out, and in the case of an operator, it's my dam. This is my legacy. I built it. I want to take my grandkids out here. I want to show them that I built this dam on spec, and I'm really proud of it. As an engineer, you're owning your work. You're contributing to the industry. You're making it better, and you're doing the things that are necessary to make the next step change. So those are the 5 levels of what I believe are of engagement. One of the last things I want to talk about is COVID, the COVID conundrum. This isolation has compromised us as an industry. We're not necessarily seeing it now, but we have, by being constrained and confined in where we're at, we are borrowing and we are utilizing our experiential bank account, and we're leveraging that. And as we go out into the field, and this is happening to me as well, as we're getting out into the field, it's like what you visualized in your head through these Zoom meetings is not what's happening out in the field. The process has really dehumanized our process, and we really need to get out and start touching people, so to speak. An email is not a phone call. A phone call is not person-to-person communication. Zoom doesn't replace individual human interaction. Photographs and drone flyovers don't replace feet on the ground, ever. You've got to get on the ground. You've got to see it firsthand. And human interaction is critical, and is irreplaceable. The problem is that we're building in deficiencies into these dams, and we don't even know it. There's going to be a price to pay somewhere down the road. So, and overarching for a young engineer, the future EoR is be yourself, ride your ride. As my daughter says, that's my daughter riding her horse. You can only be who you are. Be who you are. And then if there's any advice to the old guys, it's time to let go and delegate. I'm seeing a lot of, within many organizations, that you have very senior people that really don't want to engage and turn the keys over to the Ferrari, if you will, to the kids. And so a lot of engineers are being held down. Well, if we're going to develop people in 10 years, we've got to give them responsibility, and we have got to let go, and it's got to happen now. So again, with that, just remember that ships in a harbor are safe, but ships weren't made for harbors. So with that, David,